From shamans to scientists, mediums to masterminds, cannabis to LSD. Spark joy, spark curiosity, and spark a joint. Because you're listening to Budding Mind. Budding Mind. Chels.
Hey.
As we just realized earlier last week, you're one of my first friends in Los Angeles.
That is really cute.
It's really special, and it's really quite a thing to have a nearly decades-long friend here in Los Angeles, the city of fakes. I'm totally kidding. I love everyone here. But
besides the people that we don't like, but yeah.
Exactly, right. Yeah. But I'm wondering, you're like an expert at socializing beyond being an extroverted human being. You are so incredible at maintaining relationships, as you've largely been responsible for with us, and creating new relationships in every nook and cranny of your life. And I'm wondering, any tips and tricks? Like, how do you do it? How do you have so many people in your orbit, and how do you keep them all happy?
Oh my gosh. Okay. Well, 6 of them just like frown listening because they're not happy. So not everyone's
because you didn't respond to their texts for a week.
Not everyone's happy. No, I really do love connecting with people so much. I mean, so do you. I feel that you do this as well, but just keeping connected and staying connected is one of my favorite things. And I mean, in terms of tips and tricks, I mean, I think sometimes not being afraid to host an event, not as easy in COVID times, but just with people that don't know each other. So like, I love being like, hey, let's all go to this comedy show. Let's all go to this coffee shop, and just bringing, I think the sweet spot is 3 to 6 people. Less than that is just one-on-one. And like, what is that? But just like getting a little group together. And if nobody knows each other, then it's not awkward, right? Because if it's like 4 friends and 1 new person, then maybe that person feels intimidated. But if you gather 3 to 5 people that don't know each other, win-win, right? So I love doing stuff like that. You were just at one last week. It was so fun.
Wow, you are very impressive. That was actually quite like a literal tactic for someone to take away. So thank you.
Well, I also have pet peeves with podcasts. I feel like so many people have great ideas or are good at something, but they don't actually share how or why, or they don't share tangible tips. That's the thing. I'm a huge fan of a tangible tip. I love a tangible tactile moment. Like, how did you do this? I did this, this, and this, as opposed to like, I just like put myself out there. I'm like, we're all putting ourselves out there.
I just followed my intuition.
Right. I'm like, was it your intuition or was it your GPS? Like, how did you get there?
Wow, you're brilliant. There was another thing that you told me earlier this week, that you were sorry for not responding to my 6-minute long voice notes that I sent you instead of giving you a simple phone call, because you don't use your phone for socializing during the day so that you can be productive, which I honestly feel right now is a lie. Like, I think you were just lying to me. But in theory, that's a really great idea.
It was totally lying to you. No, I love and hate that I said that, but I think it is true. Brooke's laughing at me the entire time. By the way, Brooke did not tell me until I walked through the door that this was going to be on video. I very clearly was not sent any information about video, and I got a wax moments before this. So if my face is completely red, you're not lying. It is red because I was waxed.
I'm really sorry about that, but grin and bear it. You're a professional. And you want to know what? Let me just put a cherry on top of your Sunday. Once upon a time, I hosted, oh my God, this is really embarrassing, but I hosted live trivia on an app like HQ.
Oh, I remember that.
But not as cool.
It was so cool. I loved that.
It was whatever. But in any case, I was live on camera, and I had to go right before I was going live. I had to go to a doctor's appointment because I had a sty, and it was so bad that the doctor literally had to like pop the sty like a fucking pimple. It's disgusting. This is horrible, but whatever. You're listening anyways. So I had to go do that, and then my eyes started slowly swelling. For some reason, I didn't call off work, and I went and filmed the show. And my producer was like, Brooke, maybe you shouldn't do this. We can have someone else do this. And I was like, no, I'm absolutely going on air. And I put on fake glasses, and I looked like a schmarm, but the stakes were really low. I guess that's what I'm saying to you here. So
great.
Wax or not, fucking grin and bear it.
Grin and bear it. I'll have to bring my fake glasses for next time. But that actually is a good solution. Fake glasses can cover a lot of things.
It can cover a lot of things, and your eyebrows look fabulous.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I also had laser yesterday. So from nose down, I'm lasered. From nose up, I'm wax. I'm one of the hairiest people that anyone I've really ever met has ever spoken to. Like, I'm not kidding.
Are you comfortable telling me where you have hair that you might not be comfortable?
Sure. Well,
telling
you
people?
can like see it right now. So right now I'm lasering vag, armpit, lip, and beard. But I will say,
Beard.
I was super, there's like no joke to that. I mean, it's all a joke or none of it's joke. I'm lasering the whole beard. I was not willing to make any permanent changes to my body at any point. Hashtag fake tat. Like, yes, I'm that person. If you're watching, if you're one of the 10 people on YouTube, this is fake tat. I was like, I'm never going to make any permanent changes to my body, including Botox. I just didn't feel the need. But the beard changed my mind. Even with the lip, like the mustache
plastic
was
surgery.
fine. Sure, it is a permanent change to your body though. But then someone's like, well, in a few like years it grows back. So I'm like, it's not a permanent change, and that was my loophole.
Yeah, I think you getting your beard lasered is vastly different than some chick getting her lips full of botulism.
Sure. So yeah, I do have a beard.
Okay.
I did blood
Cool.
tests, hormone tests. Everything was normal. That was the problem actually, because if there's a problem, they can change it and give you something hormonal to take. If there's not a problem, it's like you're fucked. You just have a beard, girl.
Okay, so your testosterone levels are normal. I think
Yes.
it's better that we didn't go the hormonal route. But you know what would be really cool is if there was like a sideshow moment and you could be the bearded lady. Like you would be super hot in that role.
Oh my gosh, I was in a play in college called The Bearded Lady. I did play a
meta.
bearded man. It was like women played men. It just didn't make sense. I did have a beard. I really liked it. And it's actually part of the reason why I'm so passionate about impersonating Jonathan Van Ness. And I love him so much because the beard, like hiding behind the beard is something that I feel like just makes me feel alive because I have all this hair. And when I dress like him, I don't have to like have it out there. And I can be like sexy without having like these hairy problems. I can't explain. It's
This
like
is so
some
revealing.
deep shit in there. Like there's something in there. Yeah.
Wow, the bearded lady lives within you. And for
Yes.
those who don't know, Jonathan Van Ness, is that
Yes.
his name?
Yeah.
He's one of the hosts on Queer Eye for the Straight Guy, and Chelsea has a
It's just
low
Queer Eye
grade.
now. They don't call it for the straight guy because it's for everyone.
Oh, I feel like I should edit that out.
Okay.
Did I just make like a social faux pas?
No.
Sorry.
You can say it again.
Okay. No, I'm kidding. Okay, but you're a busy bitch, obviously, because not only are you like acting and writing and creating all of the time and getting lasered and waxed, like you have a
We
lot.
really
in
went on a
this
tangent.
routine.
We really went on a tangent.
A valuable one. I do
Yeah.
think so.
Yeah.
But one of the things that you're up to is stand-up comedy. It's actually how I met you. And I pray that no comedians actually listen to this podcast because I know that this question will make their eyes fall out of their heads and then roll across the street and go to the auto body shop
Interesting.
across
That
from
I
me.
feel like only comedians might be listening to the podcast, so I'm worried. So I'm now scared.
Well, I think it can be a bit of a stereotypical question or conversation within the comedy community. But for those who are unfamiliar, I'm curious, as a female comedian, what are the hardships that you feel like you encounter just being a lady on the streets? Or is that a moot point of view these days?
Well, that's why I wear the beard, because then people don't know, and then I don't have to go through. No, I think that's a really valid question. I don't think it's stereotypical at all. I think the weirdest things are still that so many of shows are predominantly men. So if you are the only woman or you're one of the only women, the jokes sometimes hit different. Like if the audience is coming to see a predominantly male show, then if their humor is as such, like it's less likely to jive with my own. Whereas if I do an all-female show, then I feel like my jokes are hitting. But how rare is it to have all-female shows? Certainly they're popping up more and more. But the majority of like the shows on the road and the grind around there are not predominantly female. So like that's weird. And also just the boys club of they want you to show up to their shows so many times before they put you on, which in fairness, in the 80s was the original model, right? Like, because there wasn't other forms of entertainment. So if you weren't on your phone, you weren't doing social media, like, why not go out as an entertainer, especially, and see and support a bunch of shows? Because that was a huge and one of the only ways to support other artists. Unfortunately / fortunately, now that there's so many other outlets, people have less time to go and show up and grind and mic and support like 10 billion shows in a row before you put up. And it's kind of a boys club of like the same men are putting each other in each other's stuff, which to a point makes sense. Like, let's not poo-poo on that. Like, some of these people are grinding and work hard and they've been doing it forever and they should put each other in each other's shit. But it's like, it would be cooler if some of those power players were women, because I'd be more excited to support those people and go to like 1 million all-female shows in a row.
Yeah, I mean, diversity is the spice of life, quite literally. There's a lot of spices from around different cultures. One thing I was thinking of, which I'm not a woman who feels slighted by the patriarchy. That's not my main narrative, I suppose. Albeit I am a feminist, of course, but like loose around the edges. And I guess what I think about with women in comedy is it's like women with sports or female musicians. Of course, there's a lot of women picking up guitars, and there's a lot of females playing soccer, and there's a lot of women in stand-up nowadays, for sure. But I think we're still coming out of the era of women being unsupported in these art forms or in these practices, or they're just not being like a safe or soft landing pad for women to like fumble and fuck up in these spaces and eventually get good and be recognized. But I find that in the comedy scene, again, there are a lot of incredible female stand-up comedians, but the general consensus, I think, is like, I think women are still a little nervous to put themselves out there because historically it hasn't been a way in which we've been welcomed or received very openly.
Right. Well, especially if the place that you live is like only showcasing male comics, it's like, where is your space to show up? But if you are in one of those cities, I would say Zoom open mics, not my favorite.
God.
But if you want to meet like women in comedy, and like I host like virtual Zoom roundtables in terms of writing feedback sessions, which I think actually is a model that does work well on Zoom. Actual showcases, I'm like, absolutely not. But I feel like there are ways to connect more in all female spaces than there were ever before.
Okay, so here's where we're going to go off the deep end just a little bit. When it comes to stand-up, I find that when I am actively trying to write new material and jokes, it puts me in a heightened state of awareness and presence and observation because I'm closely listening to the world around me, waiting for a joke to happen. I'm like really tapped in. And here's where I get a little far out. So I believed, we have the 5 human senses, sight, sound, yada, yada, yada. The 6th sense is said to be your sense of intuition. The 7th sense, the very crown chakra, if you will, I think is your sense of humor. I think there is something divinely soulful about having a sense of humor in your perceptions of the world around you. And I think that comes with non-attachment, not taking things too seriously, just seeing like the light in things. But I'm curious, if you have anything, if you think the sense of humor is spiritual at all, or how do you think comedy in general is valuable to the human experience?
Ooh, I love the idea of it being a 7th sense. I haven't heard of it like that. I really, really like that. I completely agree because I think, you've experienced tragedy. Many people listening may have as well. And the only way out is through. Comedy equals tragedy plus time is one of my favorite quotes. While something is not inherently comedic in its most tragic form, I feel that after some amount of months or years, it certainly becomes funny, and it's almost a spiritual or divine way of looking at your tragedy is through a comedic lens. I always talk to people in my podcast, Dying of Laughter, if the word comedic is not resonating, is there something so unique, bizarre, or unusual about your tragedy that just made you laugh out of uncomfortability, or just you had no other option? So I absolutely think it's like a braid, comedy and tragedy and spirituality. It's like the 3 strands of our souls, I don't know.
Wow.
And braiding them together is just so inherent to life. And I think a lot of people have that sense even if they don't know that they do yet, right? They're like, why am I laughing through this pain? You and I have kind of figured out why and how we're doing that. Some people might be on the beginning of that journey, but I do feel that we'll all find ourselves there at one point.
That was so beautiful. The visual of the braid.
Let's braid each other's hair, Brooke. Really, next we should just braid each other's hair.
Before you laser it all off. Oh, wow. I love that so much. Yeah, absolutely. I love of course, you need comedy, you need a sense of humor in order to get through the tragedy, or else, well, I suppose people do it other ways, you know, through drugs and addiction and things like that.
Yeah, for sure. There's a place for that. Little tag that it just, you know, people, I feel like a lot of people on podcasts like are quite spiritual, quite comedic, or a combination. And it's interesting because some of the spiritual guests I have who are death healers or spiritual healers can be some of the funniest, and some of the comedians can be the most spiritual and or depressed is another way of looking at it. But it really can depend. So that's another interesting juxtaposition that I see.
Oh, brilliantly put. All right, moving on. You've been acting for a super long time. So long.
Soups long.
Forever. Girl. Just kidding. But you have. You have a very impressive resume. I've actually never looked at your IMDb before. I did yesterday.
Bless.
I mean, girl, pages of content you've participated in. Chelsea's been on ABC and HBO. She had a little stint at Buzzfeed. She's pseudo famous and we love her for it. But the road to success is obviously a very fucking long one. What keeps you committed to the pursuit of your dream?
Ooh,
Inspire me.
That's a good question. Well, I feel the same about you. Also love your resume. I love how you've never been to IMDb. I've been to yours many times. So that's, you know, the key difference between
Cool, sorry.
Brooke helps me with my spiritual guidance and I help her with business guidance.
Yeah.
I don't know. I feel like
I call you and I'm like, what do I do for this audition? Who do I call for this thing? Yeah, you help me with acting.
Like, how do I stop crying? So that's the yin and the yang of our relationship. In terms of what keeps me going, I think it's what's really, I mean, I think what's exciting is I just am so passionate about what I am doing that there's just no other way. Like I genuinely look forward to waking up and seeing what might happen. And I think a lot of people in the arts feel that way. And some people in other fields of work are going to feel that way too. I think it's also just cool. It's I'm going to say this another way. I think it's rare to feel that about something. So I don't take it for granted. That said, I also, I mean, another way of looking at it's like, well, this is my job. What else am I going to do? Right? Like, what else am I going to do at this point besides keep showing the fuck up? But I love it. I think there's the hope of I think there's the idea that every single week is different in the entertainment industry and anything could happen at any time is exciting. And I feel like it's an interesting juxtaposition of ambition and faith. It's one of my favorite things to explore. What is the relationship of ambition versus faith? Like how much of it is it generated by yourself versus what is divine? What is meant to be? Is there something meant to be? But I think if you have a healthy relationship to either, it's just keep going, keep showing up, keep doing something. And the faith and the luck are a part of that, but you have to keep showing up. And that's why I do that, to hopefully have something more exciting happen tomorrow.
Wow, that was so gorgeous. I read something online recently, and by read something, I mean it was a meme, sue me.
That's funny.
And it said, I think entrepreneurs really try to create their own businesses as a spiritual path. You don't realize that's what you're doing when you're like, oh, I came up with this very unique toothbrush company, or, oh, look, I designed this squatty potty. But I think entrepreneurs, and I consider actors and artists entrepreneurs, of course, your soul signs up for an entrepreneurial journey as a segue into a spiritual unraveling. And I think it kind of has to be that way. I find that very interesting about Los Angeles, how many actors I know, or singers, or musicians, or performers who came to LA with like a super specific, very narrow dream, myself included, and how that has had to be like Rubik's cubed, reshaped a million different ways, redefined, re-architected in order to let myself not be depressed. I mean, in order to like find sanity in the pursuit. We are constantly, I forgot that thought.
We're constantly changing what we're doing. It's like we have the same destination, but perhaps the path is taking a different long ride. Like the path is taking like a long way around the bend when you really wanted to just like cut the fuck over the river. But no, Rubik's Cube is a good analogy, I feel like, for the shifts that we keep making.
And there's very much a necessity to redefine the way you look at success
Sure.
as, again, as a way to, I guess, motivate yourself to keep going. Because if your vision of success, or at least I found this for myself as a performer, as a creator, if my vision of success is I am not there, it's not good enough until Quentin Tarantino calls me and is like, I want you in this movie, or until ABC is like, we want to put you on, you're the anchor of this new show. If that is what success is to me, then I won't be able to get out of bed on the daily. And so while those things still remain ambitions, as you said, they are still dreams that, I can believe in myself to possibly achieve them. There also has to be, again, this like non-attachment philosophy of, yes, I'm going to put my wish into this bucket, but I'm not going to let it ruin me if it doesn't come to fruition. Being open to what other forms of success manifest into your life. So since you moved out here to LA to now, how have you redefined your own version of success, and how do you manage?
I feel like you and I always talk about this. We're like, our next project, like our next doing thing. We always like have so many things coming up. I feel like my definition of success has evolved through the expansion of my exploration through grief. That's not something that was ever part of the original dream. So very much still aligned with scripted comedy, and that has been and continues to be my number one dream. Adding more stand-up into the mix, adding comedic grief podcasts and volunteering in grief spaces has been an expansion of that success. And I think a lot of artists out here are involved in many things, and that works too. I feel like I had some resistance initially because I don't want to say I'm a black and white person, but my brain can get, I think everyone can be confused by gray. A confused mind says no, and I don't want to be a jack of all trades, master of none. However, part of what you're signing up for as an artist is a little bit of that. So I just say, like, in terms of advice for other people, I think if you can choose 2 or 3 things and consistently evolve and show up for those, then that's fine. I certainly in my earlier 20s was maybe juggling 6 or 7 balls regularly, and then that's what I needed at the time, and that was really exciting. But now I'm just more focused on, scripted comedy and auditions, stand-up, podcasting, and grief spaces. Grief spaces is also a lot of personal work that I don't necessarily think aligns with my professional goals, and yet it somehow does. So,
and yet it somehow does.
And yet it somehow does. So I think 2 to 3 things is like how I expand my definition of success, and not just do the scripted comedy every single day. And as an actress with auditions, it varies, because sometimes you'll have more auditions, sometimes you'll have less. And we don't choose when we're on set. To a point, you can create your own content and choose that. And I recommend it and love doing that. But there's so much that is out of our control. So having those things that you can push forward. And one of my best friends, who's a career coach, Brian Pataka, that he always, has instilled in me from a very young age, is your goal is not something, you can't have goals that you can't control, right? So goals have to be actionable, measurable, attainable. Your goal can't be, I'm going to lose this many weight, or I'm going to have this, I'm going to lose this many pounds, or I'm going to have this many auditions, or I'm going to book this many shows. You can have those desires and those instincts and put them on vision boards and have those intentions, but goals are things that you can hold yourself accountable to. So a goal might be, I'm going to make a short film this year. I'm going to have a 5-minute stand-up set this year. I'm going to launch my podcast this year and release an episode every single week. It has to be something that you can do. And then you can decide for yourself, did I show up for myself? Did I accomplish my goal? Because those external factors are not something that we can control. Hence, we can't accomplish them. Hence, they are not our fucking goals. So everyone listening who wants to book a TV show, that is not your goal. That is your intention. That is your desire. It is not your goal.
Holy shit. As close as we are, I feel like my mind is being blown right now with you are channeling wisdom through this very body, Chelsea London Lloyd. Thank you for sharing that. Wow. And so, so one of your goals, what was it, 2 years ago, was to create a podcast. Dying of Laughter, which we've mentioned, which is a fabulous podcast and such a unique concept and so expertly crafted. So, as we said, Chelsea interviews comedians or something of the sort, people who have lost a parent or a sibling, and the conversations go well beyond the sadness and the darkness of grief. You look at the whole fractal diamond of the experience and help to translate it into something that's kind of entertaining. And like, grief, death is not something that is generally perceived as entertaining. And you're taking it to this new space and it's so phenomenal. So everyone, please listen to it. But let's start with the freaking origin story. So you lost your own father and then decades later were inspired to turn this experience into art and healing for other people.
Decades. I'm now 46.
I'm so sorry. I'm sorry. A decade plus some change. I'm sorry.
It's okay. It has been more than a decade. And like, that's what happens when you age. Yeah.
I work with loose facts, loose numbers, and loose timelines. Okay. So
Love it. Love
you're
it,
the
queen.
tangible.
Yes.
But yeah, tell me what made you commit to creating Dying of Laughter?
Thank you for asking. And Brooke was also one of my first guests on the show. It remains to be a terrific episode. Maybe you could re-air it sometime if you wanted. If you want an off week, get a little lazy, book something, don't have time, do a little re-air. It actually would be a cool way for listeners to like learn more about you.
Permission?
Yeah.
Oh my God, cool. Love that idea. Love that idea.
I think it's fun to do that. Totally up to you, of course, or save it for a rainy day. Sometimes I re-air episodes on mine for, again, rainy days. I feel like you can't do it too often or your podcast just becomes like that. But like definitely like a few times a year, I'm like, okay. And sometimes they're like the most downloaded episodes because think about it. Your friends and community are really excited about you and all your episodes are going to be about other people. So then it's like, oh, an episode about Brooke, you know?
You're fucking brilliant.
Brill.
But tell me about your fucking podcast.
Brill Student Entertainment, my representation. It's not. My impetus, I feel like I'm so serious today. It's because I'm drinking tea and had a wax. Like I just became a housewife and I don't know. I don't know what that means. We could cut that. My desire to start the podcast came when I was 25, when my mom was diagnosed with breast cancer for the second time, which you know, but I'll share with listeners. So my dad had died when I was 19 and he had been sick since I was 4. So I already was really interested in the idea of anticipatory grief and what it's like to start grieving someone at an earlier age or for a long period of time, which fortunately or unfortunately will not be everyone's experience, but for whatever reason that was mine. So I had a lot of time to think about that. And by the time that he died, I felt mixed emotions like everyone does. It was horrible. It remains the worst experience that I've personally had while here on earth because we were very, very close. And that was the person that I talk to every single day, and I'm very, very close to my mom, which I'm grateful for. But my dad and I were just like that was my person. I don't know how to explain it. It's like, just something that you can never get back. Like you just don't get another parent or sibling back. And I know you have experience with this with your brother. You don't get that back. And of course, other people come and fill your life in other ways, and it's amazing. But it was just so shocking. Like just this person that I talked to, I just couldn't talk to them. And it was just like, I'm laughing because it's just so unbelievable. You're like, I can't accept this. And yet you have no choice. So that was at 19. I was a freshman at USC. My freshman year sucked. It's just the whole thing was a blur. I feel like that's an awkward time for people in general. Then I had friends who was like the best year of their life. My high school friends were like obsessed with their college experiences. I was like not connecting. I was just like flying home on the weekends. People were like, who is this like sad, weird girl?
All that change all at once.
Yeah, so I won't go into, I'll jump timelines a little bit for time. So then he died and, got through college and whatever. And then you're 22. So I feel like that was just a blur and was not grieving. I think people in their early 20s and teens are not necessarily grieving the way that people in their 30s or 40s might be able to be like, okay, let's really address this. But even then, many people struggle. So then when I was 24, 25, my mom's breast cancer returned stage 4 metastatic, which means there are many tumors throughout her body. She had also had breast cancer throughout elementary school. My parents were both diagnosed technically the same year, although my dad had symptoms for several years and thinks that he was misdiagnosed. So that's why I play with timelines. Sometimes I say he was 4, sometimes I say he was 8. It depends who you ask. They were both diagnosed in 3rd grade. Breast cancer is very common. We all know someone with breast cancer. She fortunately was fine after a few years, surgery, radiation, etc. However, I look back and I go, oh, like her disease wasn't terminal. So I feel like her experience was overlooked. Okay. Cut to, she's now diagnosed again. It has returned 17 years later. And they've said, Susan, you will have this the rest of your life. Now, I work with a lot of people and I talk and mentor and volunteer with lots of people with cancer. And fortunately, medicine is good and people can live with stage 4 cancer. But at the time, we didn't know what her situation would look like, and we didn't know if she would. So I started to look into end of life planning for my parent, for myself. I became really interested in the idea of writing everything down and like prepping a funeral. What kind does my mom want to be buried or cremated or like turned into a fucking tree or a rainbow or a diamond earring? Like what the fuck? And I'm not going to have parents when I'm 30. And I totally spiraled. Hi, Sunny.
No.
Hi, cutes. She heard rainbows and diamonds and she's like,
Down.
hi.
Down.
I don't know what to do.
Down. Okay. Stay.
Love you. Okay, I'm going to wrap up this tangent.
Yeah, the last thing you had said was you got into life planning, end of life planning.
Because it was like, okay, worst case scenario, like I don't have parents, I'm in my 20s. Middle case scenario is like she lives a few years, and best case scenario, she lives a long time for whatever reason. And then we are mimicking the experience that I had with my dad in some ways of this prolonged illness, which I was not the biggest fan of. However, so far, years later, we are on the best case scenario. It's now been 5 years, which is incredible. It's also confusing because I have a lot of thoughts on this, like people that lose people suddenly. I think it's all just so interesting and there's no right or wrong, but I'm like, I'm not a fan of prolonged illness because it's exhausting and there's like so many updates and tragic things along the way, but of course better than the alternative of her dying, of course. So this is good.
Right.
But
which do you choose?
Yeah. It's like, okay. But it's exhausting. So I just felt like if I'm going through this, then someone else might be as well. I didn't know who to talk to. I was like, who are people that have lost their parents? Like, where do I go? And the age old thing. And I feel like you're doing this beautifully in like spiritual and cannabis spaces. It's like, if you don't know where the community is, like I'm going to say this another way. If you don't have the community, you start the community. I was like, who and where do I wish this existed? I turned to, Google, and then I turned to this place called Our House in Los Angeles, which provides free grief groups for young adults. Highly recommend them. Anyone listening in Los Angeles, which is specific, but Our House is a great grief group. And they said our groups are for people who have lost their parents and siblings and best friends if it's been less than 5 years. And my mom's diagnosis was like 5.5, technically 6. And I thought, oh shit, that makes total sense. I absolutely understand like why they do that. Of course, the first few years are so much more difficult.
Right. But I have this problem and I'm not even allowed here either.
Right. Because I was like, I need to address my dad's grief that I had avoided once my mom's diagnosis came up, because I feel that a lot of people start to grieve when something else happens in their life because they're like, shit, I didn't deal with that. And now I have this other problem, and it kind of like blends together. So I was like, I need to really address like my feelings around my dad. Anyway, the grief group, it had been 5.5. They couldn't take me. Finally went to therapy the first time, had never been to one in my life, couldn't recommend it more, very important, or whatever form of therapy works best for others. And so then at 27, I started I did this podcast class and started listening to podcasts and just learning. And then it eventually came out when I was 28. It all takes longer than you think, because you developed this, and just started talking with more people who had lost parents and siblings, also have like young cancer survivors on there now, and oncologists and funeral directors and just anyone in the grief space who has a comedic or unique way into their grief. So that was the very long-winded tangent as to why it started.
No, that was so beautiful, and it provides a very meaningful backdrop for you having an authentic and important voice in this space. So thank you for the long share.
Thank you.
How many episodes have you had? Do you know?
By the time this comes out, this is going to come out in a few weeks, probably, yeah. So I'll be at 90 this month, so that's exciting. And 100 will be soon after. I guess that's what happens. The numbers just keep going up. So, yeah, almost 100.
I just had a very dumb blonde moment where I was like, wow, 90 people that have lost someone they love, which is true. And like, there's depth and magnitude to that number just in your own periphery. But, every human being on Earth, Brooke, experiences loss. And if they don't, then they lose themselves.
Yes.
And they live very sad lives if they have never lost anyone by the time they die. Wow. It's such... And I don't want to like enter into a cliched space talking about like no one talks about death, but
but no one does.
No one in America wants to talk about death. They know what happens to all of us. But like also that's fucking true. And I'm really excited by this second wave psychedelic movement because I think people are tapping into their emotional wells with the support of these plant medicines. And that means tapping into our individual and collective griefs and healing what is there and allowing these conversations to be more manageable. And I'm so grateful for just the woman that you are and the art that you're putting into the world. And that probably is largely because I've also lost someone, but I know the importance it is to feel connected to people who have also lost someone. Like when my brother passed away and I met you, there was an instant connection there because we had both experienced loss. And it wasn't like no one else around is as good as us. That's not it at all. It's just that like, I know how far down your ditch has been dug. And it's a lot as like a young person. I mean, I think I met you when I was like 22 or something like that. Mm-hmm. So I didn't have a lot of peers that were able to reflect that same capacity for the human experience as me. So, but what I'm curious about is, you're still navigating the loss of your father because that's what you do. Grief is the forever process, as Hannah Mason calls it. Mm-hmm. But now you're becoming this, maybe accidentally, like you're kind of offering people therapy that come onto your podcast. And just given the nature of the subject matter, is it ever too much for you to be there for these people or to try to play the positive or just to continually come back to the conversation of grief? It's a lot to carry.
Thank you for asking that. That's an interesting question. There have been moments where it's heavier than others. Like it also depends like what else is going on in your life that week or that month, right? So far, I feel that the conversations have really like, for the most part, they've uplifted me and I've left feeling better than I thought. I will say there's been times where I've been like, okay, this is a really particularly heavy conversation today, and that could come with more recent loss or more tragic loss. All loss is tragic, but sometimes I'm like, okay, how do I set myself up for this one? But the fact that I have those feelings going in is one thing, and then when I leave, I feel amazing and I feel lighter and I feel better, and that's a true sign to me that it's I don't know,
working.
That
Something's working.
That like that's why it's like I feel like it's like a lot of things in life are like you have to wake up really early for like going to a shoot and you're like, oh, but then you get there and it's amazing, right? So like I've definitely had moments where I'm like, okay, this is gonna be a lot, and then I do it and I'm like, oh, this was fantastic, and it's really just holding the space for them to reflect. So it's not always me going there. Like I'm holding the space for that person to go there, but it doesn't mean I'm always going there with them. I cannot even imagine what it's like for a therapist who's having like deep conversations like 5-8 times a day. I mean, that's why they're trained in that, and they, I'm sure, have more tools on how to take care of themselves. I find that really interesting. But I also do things like I have the conversations earlier in the morning. If I feel like that's going to resonate, sometimes I wait till the end of the day. But for some reason, the mornings have been like, I feel like I can hold more space for people at that time. I also sometimes do like 3 interviews a week, and then I take a month off, and then I don't do it for a month, something like that. So there's little There's little ways, but yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, it's like heavy. It's hard. I mean, I'm sure you talk to so many people. Even these podcasts, everyone's going to be talking about some kind of like grief or trauma or something. Just holding space for people in general, I think, takes a lot of energy, specifically around grief or death. I don't know if I would say it's more so than any other kind of way of holding space.
No, I think it's the
Okay.
most.
Okay, great. I don't know. I've also never done any other kind of like podcast, or I've never held regular space for any other group of people. So I don't really have something to compare it to.
Stay in your lane. This is a
Okay,
good lane.
great. Okay, stay there. Okay, don't pivot.
Okay. What do you think happens when we die? If you're thinking about death all the time, and like, does that come up with the people that are on your podcast? Are they?
Well, what was so cool about your interview, I feel like your interview on my podcast were like so spiritual, because I feel like right now
So spiritual.
you're not going into like all of your spiritual thoughts in this interview as the host, which I understand, but I feel like there were so many cool things we talked about, which I guess was 2 years ago now. So I was gonna say something really mind-blowing. I don't know what happens when we die. Wow, shocker. No one does. But I'm really interested in other people's ideas. I don't feel that there's nothing. Like, I don't feel that once you die, your soul is completely gone and that there's absolutely nothing to happen. I'm really not sure. I'm continuing to shape my own opinions as to what I think that could look like. I can't pinpoint if it's reincarnation or if it's some kind of energy. Like, I feel that my dad knows about me and about my presence and about the energy of what I'm doing. Like, do I think he like knows I have a podcast and brings it to his book club and fucking wherever the fuck he is every Tuesday is be like, this week on Chelsea's podcast? Like, no. No. But I think there's something, and I think there's energy, and I think that it comes and goes, and it depends how connected you are to your own life and your own self. So at times we're more connected to our lives and ourselves, and we're more grounded, and then I feel like we have those deeper connections with those who might have passed. And then sometimes when we get caught up in our own ego or our own selves or our busy lives, then that connection is less so. Like, do I think my dad's like right here on this yellow couch? Like, not necessarily. If you are, hey Lloyd, what's up? How the fuck
Hi,
are you? It
Lloyd.
was your birthday 2 days ago. How was it? But if he's like 10,000 years old, love you, you're old. But I don't actually know. I did have a medium come to my podcast, and it was like one of the most interesting episodes because she just like straight away was like going for it with him. Like, I thought I would be really holding the space for her, like, what is it like connecting with the dead? And she was like, hold up, Lloyd's here, your dad, okay, he says this, what do you think about this? And the whole time I was like, I am not prepared for him to be there. Hello, Lloyd.
Wow, that's so fucking. I mean,
and there was no going back because the interview was happening, and I was like, I don't even have time to collect my thoughts about this because it's just happening.
I get down with mediumship, obviously.
Of
as
course
you
you
know.
do, yes.
I'll do anything to talk to the dead. I'm not gonna lie, I had a thought today about a podcast where I was like, maybe I just interview mediums and I just get free readings. It's a way to get free readings. Those when a medium is good, trust me, they're charging $700, $1,000 for a session,
For sure.
which most people who are already paying for funerals or, you know, just most people with ordinary human budgets, $1,000 to hopefully talk to your deceased aunt, uncle, grandma, grandpa, mom, dad. That's a lot of cash to just spend on a whim, not knowing if something's going to be quote unquote true or not. So I would love to make that more accessible for people. But then it just became like selfish. Then my idea just became like, but how can I make this? How can I get all the free readings?
That's actually hilarious. There's got to be a podcast where that's happening. So
Yeah.
that's funny. I feel like people can, tune into those podcasts as a way. It's, it's not the same as having your own reading, but that's a way in. Can I ask you, if you don't mind sharing, what do you think happens when people die? How has your relationship with grief and death continued to evolve over time?
Oh my goddess. The interviewee interviews were a match made in heaven. Well, I really like to sit comfortable in the seat of not knowing.
Sure.
And I think that I don't think there's so many people that are, well, I guess there's like a lot of religions on earth that know for a fact this is what happens. I think it's really fun to dance in the mystery of many what ifs. And I am really keen on exploring pretty much any avenue of what is the purpose of life? What is the origin story and where does it return to? I think that question spirals out into a million different directions. And I love this phrase that I've never been able to truncate, but essentially it's there's no one right way up the mountain. The only wrong way is taken by the person going around to everyone else saying, not your way, not your way, not your way.
Oh my gosh, that's totally me. I'm doing it all wrong. But no, that's interesting.
But, I think at the core of it, we are energy beings. And in this three-dimensional existence that we've all agreed to perceive, we are more dense matter. And I think when you ultimately pass away, your higher vibrational, energetic, light being soul self ascends away from the denseness of this reality and moves on to the space that we cannot see that exists all around us in many different forms. And I certainly am a believer in reincarnation. I just don't necessarily think that we reincarnate the way or on the timeline that we think. I think you might be living simultaneous existences. A past life could actually be a concurrent life, and you may reincarnate as a tree to take a vacation from a stress of a traumatic existence prior to, or you may reincarnate on a different planet or in a different dimension that you're not in a body. You just go to this experience to process emotions. And I think that our series of existences are all meant to evolve us closer and closer to perfection, to unity, to love, to our source. And it's a long road there.
Wow, beautiful. That was so interesting. Yeah, that was really cool. And on my show, you came and you introduced Taylor and Lloyd. They talked to each other. It was like a whole thing. Yeah. So really I love your connections and relationship to grief and death. And I wanted to add one tag onto one thing that you said, tag as if this is a stand-up set. One riff on something you said earlier. When we became each other's one of our first friends in Los Angeles, we did connect through comedy, but also through the losses of your brother and my dad. And when I found so healing as well as interesting around that is, we couldn't have had more different experiences, more or less, sudden loss versus loss for a long time, dad versus brother, all of these things are different, but we found a lot of similarity and common ground. And it inspired a lot of ways, how I think about connecting, grieving people. It's there is more in common than you think. And it also shows in humanity, there's more connection and commonalities than we think, because I wondered, for my own podcast, how will people relate if they lost someone in a totally different way? But loss is so specific. And while many people have experienced it, a lot of people our age still haven't, unfortunately, they will, or many people maybe in their 30s are losing grandparents.
Yeah.
Now,
unfortunately, our peers haven't lost anyone they love,
but what's crazy is they're going to, like you said, everyone's going to. And I thought it was so fascinating that we found so much to connect on, even though our circumstances were very different.
Well, hey, maybe that's the power of, the great plan that's laid out before we even enter into these lives. Maybe we were meant to meet. Or maybe Lloyd and Taylor did orchestrate this shit. Okay, well, we really nosedive there. I've got one final question for you.
Sure.
It's the Budding Mind podcast, baby. And we're already bursting people's bubbles. We are breaking through the common notions. What I like to ask all of my guests is there one thing, perhaps it's a tangible, perhaps it's just a theory, but a book, a song, something you've watched in the past, a philosophy, a class you've taken, something, anything that has helped to open and expand your mind?
Yes. I'm a big plugger of books, big fan of books, going back to the OG reading. That was something in 2020 that I really incorporated. I feel like not only is it so interesting, you can learn about people's lives, it's educational, it's also therapeutic, it's relaxing. I also feel that with the constant use of social media, which I very much am in that camp, people reading helps stretch your brain. It actually is a muscle. It's like working out your brain, because when I first started reading again, I could only read like a couple pages and then I was like, I'm like frantic, right? So I make sure that I read consistently so that or at least semi-consistently, so that my brain can have a workout. So specifically, the books I'll plug are The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. It was the first time I understood the concept fully and wholly of presence and being here, and how past is past and future is future, and how can you get out of your obsession with both of those things, which I tend to do. Like I am a dweller. Like I think about what if this happened? What if this, like, also neurotic Jewish brain in me. It's like,
You're evolving out of that though. I see it.
thank you so much. I mean, I need a little tiny bit of her with me at all times, just like my little Jewish neurotic crazy, like whatever she is. But I'm just like, what if this happened in the past? Like, what if this? Like, what if I had done a Broadway show when I was 8? What if this? Like, what, just everything. Like, what if I had booked that show and this show and blah, 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 blah. And then in the future, like, what if this happens? What if this doesn't happen? What if when I'm 35, this doesn't happen? Or just like anything. So I'm obsessed with the future and the past, which are never supposed to be. But Eckhart Tolle can help you just feel grounded and present. It's also a book that I'd recommend to people, whether they're grieving or not, because it's not specific to grief, and yet it can really help you through your grief moments. I'm also going to plug Modern Loss. If you are new to the idea or concept of grief and you've just lost someone, perhaps even a grandparent or a teacher or a neighbor, this is kind of an intro into these conversations. And my third I'll plug is When Breath Becomes Air. Beautiful book about an oncologist who specifically helped save people dying of lung cancer become diagnosed with lung cancer, and how him and his wife navigated that. It's a really beautiful book. So those are 3 of my favorites right now.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much. Your brain expanding, that whole concept of, I can only read a couple of pages in a book, how resistant people are to reading. No shit, you have to push through it and force yourself to read more because you got to get good at it. You have to relearn the skill.
It's like working out at the gym. When you haven't done it for a while, you can only run for like 3 minutes, or no, actually that's a long time, 30 seconds. Isn't that interesting though? It is similar. Your brain reading a book, it's like going to the gym. Of course it's going to be weird when you haven't done it for a while.
Wow, I haven't thought of it like that before, and I really appreciate that because I have a difficulty with reading. I have hundreds of books. I'm reading them all the time. I read 5 pages at once, and then I'm like, I can't anymore. And then I doom scroll. So thank you for that. Wow, and Modern Loss, and the third book,
When Breath Becomes Air.
When Breath Becomes Air. Thank you so much. Okay, can you just tell everyone where they can find you on Instagram and where Dying of Laughter exists? And yeah.
Yes, I can. I'm on Instagram at Chelsea Who Else. So that's like, who else would it be but Chelsea? That's my comedy and my personal account. My podcast account is at Dying of Laughter Podcast, and Dying of Laughter is the name of my podcast on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your content. And if you're experiencing grief or anticipatory grief, feel free to shoot me a DM. I always love connecting. If you want to just share your story, if you want to vent, or you can tell me something cute or happy about your life. It doesn't have to be about a dead person, but I will take dead or alive comments, questions, etc. And I just love connecting with people in these spaces. So reach out.
Wow, you're so much nicer than me. Don't reach out to me. And thank you so much for listening to the Budding Mind podcast. Chelsea London Lloyd, I love you with my whole heart. Thank you so much for being here.
Blessings. And part 2, one day when we do part 2, we'll have to talk about cannabis and like CBD and how I do edibles now, but that's for another time. We're just gonna leave that cliffhanger for like in 6 months to a year when I come back.
Okay.
I said it.